Hello, so in this video, we'll basically be going over bases for MMA. So like, when I mean by kind of like base, I mean like this is kind of like the primary like style that most of these fighters will kind of use. And in it, we'll basically just kind of talk about like how effective they are. And we have a tier list. Amazing basically is kind of like if you have this base, you essentially are in very top echelons in terms of like the ceiling you can kind of reach as like your primary base. Great is essentially kind of like you're very good, like you're very much well respected. Good basically means is like not that like kind of you're mid, but like, you can still like have a very high like ceiling with it. However, it's more of like unusual and kind of more of like an unorthodox kind of pick. All right is basically just kind of like you can win some matches here and there. However, it's kind of like you're gonna lose most of your matches against like these kind of guys. But you're not horrible, which is kind of like everyone will beat you, and you might as well just not have even learned anything really. And speaking of like not wanting to learn anything, we have the first one, Aikido. Aikido is essentially a grappling sport where it's like you essentially try to like have your opponent come at you and you just throw them, and that's it. However, it's like the main purpose of it is to kind of throw them without significantly harming them. It's more of like you take their momentum and you kind of use it. Like example of like is kind of like in like animes and like movies and TV shows with fight scenes, and like a person does like a punch, but someone kind of like ducks under and kind of like rolls them over them into like a throw. That's kind of what Aikido is what it's trying to do. However, unlike in those type of like televisions and like anime, where it's like they're throwing them to hurt, it's more of like you're trying to throw them just to kind of get them to like back away, really. And I think it's just a waste of time. It's just so horrible to do, to where it's just kind of like it just makes no sense, really. Like it generally just kind of makes no sense. Boxing. Out of like the striking sports, boxing is pretty good. However, as MMA as a whole, that includes grappling, makes it a lot worse. However, it's pretty good. Now, for boxing, the main draw of boxing that like that limits it kind of is the fact is limited arsenal. You can't defend takedowns, and you can't kick. Now you think with those three weaknesses, you think how can boxing be good? Boxing should probably be alright at this. However, the main benefits of boxing is you have a jab. Every martial artist has a good jab at worst. And that's just based off of boxing. It is built off of boxing. That jab. Because in boxing, if you don't have a jab, you can't find anything. And that same thing applies for martial arts too. A lot of them learn to do their jab from boxing. And the other good thing about boxing is footwork, head movement, and overall just kind of like general like punch defense of it. Those three things alone can counteract in a way the three kind of like main weaknesses of boxing, depending on the style you do it. It's depending on the style you go against. Now, with kind of like those weaknesses and the strengths kind of counteracting, the main genius is kind of like the jab. And jab is the most fundamental thing about it. However, there are some like boxers that are like there's some like mixed martial arts fighters that's like doesn't really do boxing as much, and they still are very successful with it. Because there are other sports that kind of takes that and move it to another level with it. However, like we have had dominant boxers kind of like pointed. I think the main example that I think all of us can agree on is Piotr Yan. Piotr Yan is probably like one of the greatest interpretations of like boxing. Max Holloway too is another excellent example of it. But it's just kind of like, yeah, no, like boxing is a good style for mixed martial arts. However, it's like there's better styles than it. It's still very good, but there's better styles to it. An example of which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, you might think, why is it not an amazing category? It is like the basis of like submissions, and you basically can defend yourself on your back. However, the main issue with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and at least in like the modern era, is like in most, at least in the dojos that I have kind of seen, not a lot of them are really teaching takedowns like that. Not a lot, really. And this is coming from someone who's like more of a wrestler, by the way. They're not really teaching takedowns, which is just as important as you maintaining your guard and like getting them into like a submission attempt, like a Kimura, kind of like trying to think of something else like other ones that you kind of do from like off your back. Kind of like Kimura's kind of good, a guillotine kind of like, or like being able to kind of like move around and kind of take their back, like yeah, like it's good when you're on your back. However, you still need to know how to get someone to the ground so you can do your offense. And you also kind of need to understand like how you can be taken onto your back so you can understand kind of like what defenses you can do really. And at least as most times, especially in some like submission matches, they just both of them just start on their butt, which I think is dumb. It's really dumb. It's pointless. It basically removes this, like the main kind of like benefit of like grappling. It removes it completely. And I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong. I think it's dumb. And I just think it's wrong. However, just off the pure submission holds and the fact that it's a grappling sport, it's still great. Like there's still a lot of dominant like jiu-jitsu specialists that have like done very well in this sport. I think the main example would be the Gracies of old. Modern day would probably be like Charles Oliveira, Gilbert Burns is another like really good example of it. And like just like these type of fighters are just like they still win a lot of matches off of their submissions. So it's like it's still very good. However, there are still some flaws that kind of keeps away from amazing. And speaking of like amazing that starts with A, the other A to your right is gonna have a new person with capoeira. Now you might think capoeira, you don't even really like hit someone, which is true. However, just off the foot movement and just the overall like creativity of it, it could be a good base if you were to like take capoeira and go to an actual sport you can strike with. You immediately would have a lot of like acrobatics, you would have more agility, and overall just more of just kind of like awareness of like where you can kind of move with your body and just kind of like create it into more of the creativity of it. Like you could basically become a very creative striker if your basis was capoeira. However, it's just like I don't think you would be very good if that was your only style. Like the only really people you can beat is like Aikido, really. But even then, it's like it's still a good style. It's still like not good in the sense of you beat someone, but it's still like it's interesting. It's more interesting than good, actually. However, if you were to combine it with other stuff, you could probably do at least something with it. As that being your base, you can kind of do something with it if you combine it with other styles. However, like it as alone is not a good style, so that's kind of why it's alright. What isn't alright, but instead is great, is catch wrestling. Catch wrestling is essentially the, you know what? Actually, no, learn down to good. Why is that? Because even though yes, catch wrestling allows you to do takedowns, it's from a different style, which is called Greco-Roman, which is where a lot of the takedowns come from. However, they allow you to go to the legs like regular wrestling, which is folk style, and they add some submission holds. The main problem with catch wrestling is the fact that it's just kind of like it's evolved since then. And you'll kind of see more of like the evolutions of it as like, the evolution is like a lot more down like the list. However, it's just like catch wrestling is like it's good, but like it's also outdated. It's more outdated now. And I think that's something that has to be considered. However, like just off of like the pure respect for it, it deserves being good because it technically is still the forefather of MMA. Next up is freestyle wrestling. It's great. I like to call freestyle wrestling the direct polar opposite of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Because in folk style wrestling, it's regular wrestling. However, you can lock your hands, which you may think one major thing is kind of like doesn't change that much difference. However, for wrestlers that can lock their hands, you can do a lot of stuff off of that. However, you can't submit. You basically can't submit anyone. So, with it, however, it makes it the polar opposite of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you kind of can't submit a lot of people. However, the difference is like your takedowns won't be as good. In freestyle wrestling, it's you'll have amazing takedowns, and your submissions won't be as good. It's two sides of the same coin, but the coin is still great. So because of that, it deserves to be in great tier. Next up is Greco-Roman. Greco-Roman is what catch wrestling is based off of. And you may think, oh, then why is catch wrestling above Greco-Roman? The reason why I say that Greco-Roman is a little better is because it's more specialized in the throwing category. And the other thing we have to consider is women's. A lot of like women are very good in like upper body throws and like those sort of things, which I think is very kind of important because those are more practical in like women's MMA. So I think that just has to be considered, and I think if we're going to consider that, then I think it automatically deserves to be considered into good. It's also still like wrestling, however, it's just kind of you just can't go for like the legs, which is kind of dumb. However, it's still a grappling, so I think it still deserves to be kind of like above boxing, really, because it's like as a base, it's like you can still be pretty good with it. Like Greco-Roman. It's like those styles is very much you have a very strong like base in terms of like where your stance is, very strong legs, very strong upper body that can just like move people. And you're also like not afraid of like being like very physical down low in there in like the clinch. So I think just because of that, it should be considered like good. Maybe I'll lower it down down kind of the line of good later on. However, it's still good. Next up is Hapkido. Hapkido is essentially it's a Korean martial art. It's more of a form of self-defense that employs like joint locks, some grappling, some throwing techniques, and like some kicks and punches. Also, weapons. A lot of weapons is used in this sport. Like for example, we have a knife, sword, rope, nunchucks, a cane, short stick, a staff, and kind of like a big loud noise, and kind of like a bow staff, or a bosutsu, I think is how you pronounce it in Japanese. However, Hapkido is good. Not good. It's alright. It's like capoeira in the sense where it's like you have some stuff to where it's like you can essentially have like a wide list of moves. Like your bag will be pretty deep. However, not a lot of stuff in that bag is good. However, some stuff that is kind of good, like some kicks, some punches, and some throws, and some like joint locks, those can be pretty valuable still. However, but like the fact that you have to like learn like weapons, and that's a big part of this sport, makes it kind of like you're not really focusing on the hand-to-hand combat of it, but more of like the weapon combat of it, makes it less good. And I think the fact that it's like that's even like a main factor of like what the sport does bumps it down like a lot in terms of like the practicalities of it. Because it's like in MMA fight, who's gonna pull a gun? Like who is gonna pull out like a gun at someone, or who's gonna like pull out a knife? Who's gonna pull out a sword? Like imagine Habib versus Conor McGregor, but you're allowed to pull out swords. Yeah, that will end badly. So don't think it'll be good. However, it's like as a basis in terms of like some of the stuff that's within it, I think it actually be pretty solid. It'll be a alright base. Next up is Jeet Kune Do, or the martial arts that Bruce Lee has made. Is essentially counter-striking. Jeet Kune Do is essentially counter striking the sport, where essentially it's basically just kind of like made by Bruce Lee to sort of just kind of like be able to kind of defend themselves. However, it's just kind of like it's based off of like Taekwondo and that stuff, and it's very much not Taekwondo, no karate. It's more based on karate. I don't know why I have Taekwondo in the mind right now, but like maybe because I just see it on the list later down the road. However, it's just kind of like some of the stuff about it is just kind of like, yeah, like a lot of it's kind of good like movement. A lot of it's kind of known for its motion. A lot of it is like the concept of just like parrying and punching at the same time, which is like it's alright. However, it's like it's very much more basic rooted than like the standard like Chinese belief in like combat, and kind of like the kicks is more low, a lot more like lower kicks, no like real high kicks really, and just like the basis of it is like there's just not a lot of like grappling in it. However, it's like it's not a bad style. However, it's just like how many Jeet Kune Do artists do you know that's be doing shit like this? And just because of that, it just goes on alright. It's an alright category. And speaking of alright, Judo is next. Judo. Now, if we're talking about women's MMA, it'll probably go in great. Got athletes like Ronda Rousey, like is the main kind of example of this, of like women MMA judo. However, in men, there's not a lot of real dominant judo performers, or like judicos, I think I pronounced it, I believe. I could very much be wrong and pretty offensive. However, I don't really think that matters much at this point in time. However, it's just kind of like judo is like a lot of things about it that makes it good. Like a lot of the throws and some of the trips is very good. However, it's like, again, you can't punch. And you may think, okay, then why is it alright then? You have Greco-Roman, which is like that. The reason why I do that is because it's like is because it's more of like what you're wearing. Because in judo, you're wearing more of like the garbs and shit. Where like more of the stuff where you can kind of like clinch up near the collar and just throw someone with it. Greco-Roman is more of like you're grabbing bare skin. You have more practical uses in MMA fight with Greco-Roman because you're actually touching the skin on skin. And unlike judo, where you're kind of grabbing at the collars, you're grabbing at any sort of hooks. Your hooks are a lot more easier and available to grab. And I think because of that, it just knocks it down a whole tier. Next up is karate. People like Michael Venom Page and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson made this kind of popular. And it's a very good kicking sport. Very good. Like you have access to the kind of more of that side leg, bounce around a little bit, like you push up kicks. Very quick on movements and very much more of like a movement around, kicking and striking and stuff. Like GSP was another example of a guy who like did karate. Like it has a lot of good fighters. However, the modern day where karate is basically kind of like a kid sport now, where you essentially like buy your way in to kind of get belts and shit, diminishes it by like a lot. However, just for like the history of it and more of like the actual practical uses of karate, which is more of like creative kicks and the overall movement and the bounce that you get, because you can tell who did more of those like type of sports based on like the level of bounce. Like if you watch Michael Venom Page, constantly moving his feet around a lot. Like there is never a moment where that man stops. And same thing for Wonder Boy. They don't really stop moving at all. Like there's not a waste of movement. Next up is Kempo. Kempo is a martial arts that essentially is about it's it's kind of just like the idea, just kind of like a lot of it is more just like the main thing is called like the law of the fist, whereas essentially just kind of like this is just like a bad sport, really. Like it involves striking, throwing, and some fights on the ground. However, it's like you're wearing pads and you're also wearing the garbs, so it's like there's no real practical use of it. And just like it's just not as good. Like it's really just not as good of like a combat sport. And actually, you know what? It's above Aikido. Yeah. Oh no, it's definitely above Aikido because at least they actually punch people. However, it's more of like what you're doing in there. It's like it's not really gonna be as useful because in order to do it, you're not really practicing on like a bare skin, bare body to really understand the feeling of it to get hit and to hit. So I think because of that, it just makes it just not that good. And of course, yeah, I was like kind of something at the beginning, just because the fact is just like I just don't know a lot about it because it's just that bad. Like there's not like who here is a Kempo master and actually is relatively very high level because of it. Not a lot of people, exactly. So yeah. Next up is kickboxing. Kickboxing, I would say it's up there as great. It's essentially boxing, but add kicks. However, it still has limitations to their arsenal. However, it's a lot better than boxing. And as far as like the polar flip, it's more of a flip of boxing in terms of like the strengths and weaknesses. Where it's like, in terms of boxing, how people tend to like defend themselves, it's more of like you have your hands more up and you're more of like shielding. It's more shield focused than like slipping and rolling against punches. So it's like the defense movement is not as good. Is not as good. It's still pretty good, but it's not as good as boxing. However, the fact that you actually are able to kick and have full access to your body in terms of your attacks makes it so much more better and much more practical use than if you were to, let's say, just like be able to punch. Like it just makes it a lot more practical, and there's many of like good examples of like kickboxers who have made it very well, like Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya are like the two greatest examples of this of like martial artists who came from like kickboxing and just dominated the UFC. This makes it very good. Next up is Krav Maga. Krav Maga is essentially is essentially like Israeli like self defense. Or no, it's not self defense. It's like a self defense system for like their military. Again, I'm dying, but like that's the point. But essentially, it's like it's not that bad of a base because even then, it's still used repeatedly, and like even our own military system, USA, it's very much used all the time. It is very much a very like physical in terms of the attacks with it. However, it's like you also do have to use kind of like items, and also again, it actually kind of teaches you, hey, like aim for the weak points of the body, like your eyes, your neck. Groin is a little bit of a concern, and also knees too. However, it basically uses a lot of good stuff in here. That actually makes it kind of valuable. Actually, it actually makes it like pretty valuable to use. And it's actually kind of like a base up of like what makes MMA like MMA. However, it does kind of apply more like weapons and for like some like illegal strikes in MMA. So because of that, it kind of goes in good. Like it's pretty good. However, I will say it's more of like that boxing level good. Because at least in Krav Maga, you will probably be very well balanced. However, you're gonna throw some illegal strikes. You're gonna throw a lot of illegal strikes, probably. Dying, but still surviving. So yeah, no. So I just think like it actually like it wouldn't be that bad. Next up is Kung Fu. Kung Fu is the same as karate, but just a little worse. And like the same reason kind of applies to it. So because of that, it goes in the alright category. I think I would rather be able to do Kung Fu than Hapkido. That's just my opinion. However, it's just like Kung Fu is essentially the same thing as it, where it's just like it's a lot of like high movement, high like strikes, a lot of creativity in it. However, it's just like it's just not that good. It's just not that good, and it just makes no sense of like why you want to use it as like your main like style. It just makes no sense. It's pointless. Makes no sense. And honestly, I just think you could use a lot more time doing something else than it. Also, again, the same thing with the whole weapons. It also uses a lot of weapons, which makes it not as good. And I don't understand why they want to use weapons. But like the fact you're also heavily trained on weapons makes it not as good. Next up, Muay Thai. Amazing. Easily goes in amazing. And also, one thing I just noticed, they don't have base wrestling, which is annoying. They don't have folk style. Thought this one had folk style in it. We'll talk about folk style wrestling later on, but like Muay Thai is amazing. It's kickboxing, but add the ability to knee and elbow people. That is crucial. Super crucial in terms of like what you're able to do to people. Because it's like you can deliver like an elbow blow and just kind of like knock someone else straight off the elbow. Many high level people have come from like Muay Thai. Anderson Silva, Yuri Prohaska in the modern days, Khalil Roundtree. Very good examples of like Muay Thai specialists. Or like very high level Muay Thai. And I just think like it has the same flaws as kickboxing where it's like, yeah, not as much like graceful movements. However, just the tenacity, the toughness, and the elbows and knees just makes it so much more better than kickboxing as a basis to learn to the point where it has to go in an amazing tier. Next up is ninjutsu. Not to get confused with like Naruto and stuff like that, where it's like Shadow Clone Jutsu and that sort of shit. But ninjutsu is very much more of like guerrilla warfare, like espionage, and more just kind of like just hanging around, being more like kind of like stealthy a little bit. It uses weapons. However, just because of the nature of it, it goes horrible. Name me a ninjutsu guy doing MMA. Larry, there's really been a video where one guy challenged a mixed martial artist to a match, and he claimed as a self-proclaimed ninja, and he got his ass whooped immediately. Like, it's horrible. Actually, yeah, that is makes perfect sense. Like, it's just not that good. And I don't understand how it basically gets like the respect it does, really, because it's not that good. Next up is Sambo. Sambo is essentially Dagestani wrestling. And you know what? Because of it, we're going to basically use Sambo as like wrestling because they're both will have the same reason of it. Sambo goes in amazing, like Habib, Israel, Islam, not Islam Makhachev. I don't know why I'm thinking about Israel. It's also like 1:20 a.m. when I'm recording this video, so that's probably why I'm a little tired. It's amazing. However, they took all their techniques from other sports and mixed it into their own kind of thing. However, it's still very good. It's still very kind of like good of like a combat sport in terms of the amount of people who have done it. And just kind of like, there's just a lot of just dominance. Like, Sambo is like kind of like the way of like grappling for it. Because it combines like all like kind of the grappling of like judo, jujitsu, catch wrestling, and mixes like some punches and shit into it. So like, yeah, it deserves to go into amazing tier. Not a lot of flaws in it in terms of just kind of like what is limited. I mean, the only real flaw is probably like kicks. But even then, it's like you can just mix it up with kickboxing, and then boom, you have like a very dominant fighter. You have a very scary man, and then instead of kickboxing Muay Thai, oh god, that's horrible. That's a horrible combination to face off against. And speaking of horrible, sumo. The average sumo match is like 5 seconds. It's literally just two guys pushing each other until one of them either slips or gets out of the ring. It's horrible. Like they literally had, I think in the beginning, a sumo guy compete in an event, and he was just doing bad. It was just so bad to watch. It was horrible. Very horrible to kind of like watch. And I just think that like because of that, sumo deserves to just be like in this like horrible tier next to like Haikido. Next up is Taekwondo. I did Taekwondo when I was younger, and like it was during the stages of when like at least in terms of like where like my dojo was, it was in the stage of like being like a proper like authentic a little more authentic of a dojo to like the kids stuff. So yeah, no. I think it goes in the like high alright tier, just on the cusp of like karate, because karate has more like better like showing of it than Taekwondo. However, Taekwondo, for what it lacks in the ability that you can punch and grapple to save your life, your kicks, your movements, and all sorts of stuff, high level. Very, 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 very high level. There's the creativity and like the power behind your kicks, because that's all you do. All you can do is throw kicks. Like in case you're wondering, like my styles is like it's basically a mix of Taekwondo and like wrestling. I will kick you from afar from range, spinning back kicks, roundhouse, front kicks, and that sort of stuff. And then if you get close to try to like get my legs, I will just grapple you and just like try to get you down. Like that's a mix of what my style is. And I think it just catches a lot of people off guard look at me, just jumping around and just throwing kicks like a motherfucker. I think it just makes it very good. However, I do understand why it's not as good because of the limitations. So that's why I put it on the top of our right. Next up is Tai Chi. Tai Chi is it's more of like a self-defense kind of thing. However, it's more of like exercise now. It's just like a form of exercise and meditation. So because of that, horrible. Just flat out horrible. And last but not least, to end off this list, we have Wing Chun. Now you're sitting here thinking, what the hell is Wing Chun? And you know what? I have the same surprise right now. I don't script these videos. However, Wing Chun is, to my knowledge, a kind of like a very close quarter system of self-defense, where it's very much like more hand-to-hand, a little bit of grappling, and just like a lot of very simple punches that just aims to just overwhelm people into like breaking them. However, because of the very nature of it, it belongs in the horrible tier. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Because yeah, no, you're able to understand like how to be very close to it in like the clinch. Like your clinch game is probably going to be pretty good in terms of everything. However, that's all you have is your clinch. And in terms of mixed martial arts, you need a lot more than your clinch. So because of that, I'm saying horrible. Because you're limited into like one thing However, it's more of like, yeah, no, it's above Aikido. Actually, it's above Ninjutsu. Yeah, it's like right there, kind of. And then, yeah, no, sadly it's not here. So you know what? We're gonna count like freestyle wrestling into like kind of the wrestling category, and because of that, it will kind of go into like our top of good, top of great, below amazing. Because I think that's just more of like a fair ranking for it, honestly, in my opinion. But yeah, no, that's essentially the list. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content, and I hope you enjoy this video. Have a wonderful day, everyone.